The wind howled across the empty plains of Dry Creek as dusk began to fall, turning the horizon into a bruised smear of red and violet. Elias Boone rode slowly along the riverbank, reins loose in his weathered hands. His old mare, Dusty, moved with the lazy rhythm of a creature that had known too many lonely miles. Elias wasn't looking for company. He hadn't been for years. But that evening, fate decided otherwise. It started with a sound. Faint at first, a broken gasp that didn't belong to any animal. Elias pulled the reins, his eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. The noise came again, carried on the wind, fragile and human. He dismounted and followed it down the muddy slope, boots sinking into wet earth. There, tangled in reeds and driftwood, lay a woman. Her dress was torn, her skin smeared with river mud and blood. One bare foot was wrapped in a strip of cloth, soaked dark with what he feared was infection. She was breathing, but barely. Her hair, tangled, chestnut dark, clung to her face like wet silk. For a moment, Elias froze. The war had taught him to find bodies, not save them. Yet something in the way her hand trembled, clutching the edge of her torn skirt as if for modesty even now, jolted his heart. He knelt beside her and murmured softly, "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. Beneath the grime, her eyes were a startling gray blue, wide and wild. She tried to move, but her body failed her. Don't touch me," she rasped, voice cracked from thirst. "Please." "I'm not clean." The words struck him harder than the wind ever could. Not clean. He didn't understand, not then. He thought she meant dirt, infection, the river. So he took off his duster, wrapped it around her shoulders, and said gently, "Clean or not, you're freezing. Let's get you warm before you don't wake again." She tried to pull away, but her strength was gone. When he lifted her, she whimpered like a wounded animal. Elias's jaw tightened. Whoever she was, whatever she'd been through, it wasn't simple. Her body bore marks, bruises along her wrists, a tear at the neckline that hinted at violence. He carried her up the bank, every step sinking deep into the rain-softened earth. The sky cracked open with thunder, and by the time he reached his horse, the first cold drops were falling. Elias mounted with her in his arms, careful not to jostle her too much. She was light, too light, and the way she clung to his coat made something old and aching stir in him. The ride back to the ranch was long. The storm broke fully halfway there, lightning flashing across the plains, illuminating the woman's face against his chest. Once she stirred and whispered something he couldn't quite catch. A name, maybe, or a prayer. Elias kept his eyes forward. The last thing she needed was questions. When they reached his cabin, he kicked the door open and laid her on his bed, the only dry place left. He stoked the fire until the logs hissed and flared, filling the small room with a trembling orange glow. Then he fetched clean water and cloths, but when he tried again to tend her, she flinched violently. "Don't!" she cried. "Don't look at me." Elias paused, cloth dripping into the basin. Her voice wasn't fear, it was shame. That was when he knew the dirt she spoke of wasn't from the river. It was something deeper, something that couldn't be scrubbed away. He set the cloth down and said quietly, "All right then. You rest. No one's gonna hurt you here." Outside, thunder rolled over the hills. Inside, the fire burned low, and in its flicker, Elias Boone watched over the stranger, a woman whose whispered words would change everything he thought he understood about sin, mercy, and what it truly meant to be clean. The storm didn't stop through the night. It beat against the roof like an angry spirit, shaking the windows and flooding the ground outside. Inside the cabin, Elias Boone sat beside the hearth, watching the flames dance in silence. The stranger lay in his bed, wrapped in wool blankets, her breathing shallow but steady. Every now and then she'd stir, muttering words he couldn't catch, fragments of memory that broke his heart more than any scream would have. Elias had spent years living alone. Since the war, he'd built walls around himself thicker than his cabin's logs. He fixed fences, herded cattle, and mended saddles, all the quiet, endless work that numbed a man's mind and gave him no time to remember. But now, watching that frail woman fight her nightmares, something inside him softened, cracked. When dawn finally broke, it came gray and heavy. Elias brewed coffee and checked on her again. Her fever had broken, but she was still weak. When she opened her eyes, she looked at him as if unsure whether he was real. "You're safe," he said quietly, pouring water into a tin cup. "Drink slow." She obeyed, trembling as she lifted the cup to her lips. When she finished, she let her head fall back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling. "Why'd you help me?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse, yet there was steel under the fragility. Elias hesitated, then shrugged. "Because you were dying." "That's not always reason enough," she murmured bitterly. He looked at her then, really looked. There was more to her than pain. There was pride, too, the kind that survives only in people who've been wronged and refuse to break. "Name's Elias Boone," he said after a moment. "You got a name?" She hesitated. "Clara May," she finally whispered. "Clara May Dalton." Elias nodded slowly, though the name stirred something faintly familiar, maybe from a rumor or a wanted poster. But he didn't ask, not yet. Instead, he said, "You're welcome to rest here until you're strong enough to move on." Clara's gaze flickered with uncertainty. "You don't even know who I am." "I reckon I don't need to," he replied simply, tossing another log into the fire. "You needed help, that's all I saw." Her lips trembled. Not quite a smile, not quite tears. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, but exhaustion won. She turned her face toward the wall, clutching the blanket closer. Elias gave her space. He went outside to tend to the animals, grateful for the distraction. The rain had eased, but the world was still soaked, the air sharp and cold. By the time he returned, the fire had died down, and Clara was trying, and failing, to stand. "Easy there," he said, stepping forward. "I can't stay in your bed," she muttered, trying to steady herself. "It's improper," he almost laughed. "Ma'am, you're half dead. Ain't much improper about surviving." But she shook her head, stubborn as a mule. Elias sighed, then helped her sit near the fire instead. He brought her a bowl of stew, thin but hot, and watched as she forced herself to eat. Every bite seemed to cost her effort, yet she didn't stop. As the day wore on, silence settled between them. A strange kind of peace. He repaired a saddle strap at the table while she rested, her gaze occasionally drifting toward him, cautious but curious. That night, when she thanked him softly before turning in, Elias only nodded. But after she fell asleep, he sat awake, staring at the flames again. He couldn't shake her words from his mind. "I'm not clean." He didn't yet know what she meant. But deep down, he sensed her scars weren't the kind that healed with time or warmth. Still, he decided one thing for certain. Whatever she'd done, or whatever had been done to her, Clara May Dalton would find no judgment under his roof. Only mercy. And though he didn't realize it yet, that mercy would cost him everything he thought he'd left behind. 3 days passed before Elias Boone rode into Dry Creek again. The storm had washed the dust from the streets, but it hadn't cleaned the town's soul. Gossip and suspicion clung to it tighter than mud to boots. As he tied his horse outside the general store, Elias could already feel the eyes on him. Curious, narrow, judging. Dry Creek was the kind of town that noticed everything. Who bought flour, who didn't show up at church, who rode in with someone new. And Elias Boone, the man who lived alone on the edge of nowhere, was always easy talk. But that morning, the talk had sharpened like knives. Miss Lorna Graves, the town's self-appointed guardian of morality, stood outside the store in her usual stance, arms crossed, lips thin as wire. "Morning, Mr. Boone," she said sweetly, though the venom behind her tone could have poisoned the well. "I hear you've taken on company at your ranch." Elias kept his expression unreadable. "Company?" he repeated evenly. "Yes," she said, eyes gleaming. "A young woman, I'm told." "Picked up along the river road. Strange thing, that. Most decent women don't end up half dead in the mud, wouldn't you say?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusted his hat and walked past her into the store. but her words followed him like burrs, and others turned to listen. The clerk, Tom Redding, raised an eyebrow as Elias ordered supplies. More flour, more coffee, and a few bolts of cloth he didn't usually buy. "Helping someone out, Boone?" Tom asked carefully, bagging the goods. "'Cause the sheriff's been asking questions." Elias looked up. "Questions?" Tom nodded, lowering his voice. "He came by last night. Said a woman's gone missing from over by Silverton. A saloon girl. Name of Clara Mae Dalton." The name hit like a hammer, though Elias kept his face still. "You say she's missing?" "Missing or run off," Tom said. "Depends who you ask. Some say she killed a man. Others say she's just wild in the head." He glanced toward the door, where Miss Lorna still hovered like a vulture. "Sheriff ain't sure what to believe, but you might want to watch yourself. You bringing her in would look better than them finding her at your place." Elias gathered his things without replying. As he stepped outside, Miss Lorna's voice followed him again. "You're a good man, Mr. Boone," she called. "Don't let some tainted woman ruin that. Men can be led astray." He stopped just long enough to meet her gaze. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I don't reckon mercy leads anyone astray." Then he mounted his horse and rode out before she could reply. The ride back to the ranch felt heavier. The wind carried the scent of rain and trouble. Elias's thoughts churned. A saloon girl, accused of killing a man? Clara hadn't told him anything. But he could see now why she'd said those words. "I'm not clean." When he arrived home, Clara was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the distant hills. She looked better, color in her cheeks again, hair braided back, but the fear in her eyes hadn't left. "You went to town," she said softly. "They'll know. Let 'em know," he replied. "You didn't do anything wrong." Her eyes flashed with pain. "You don't know what I did." He dismounted and looked at her for a long time. "Then tell me." She shook her head. "No one believes the truth, Mr. Boone. Not when it comes from someone like me." He wanted to press, but her voice broke something in him. That hollow, hopeless tone of a person long used to being damned without trial. So instead, he said quietly, "You can stay as long as you need. I ain't the law and I ain't your judge." Clara looked at him, searching his face for the lie. And when she found none, her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to shed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias knew the whispers in town were only the beginning. Mercy had its price, and before long both he and Clara would have to pay it. The morning sun spilled over the plains, washing Elias Boone's ranch in gold. Birds sang again after days of storm, and the air smelled of wet sage and hay. It should have been a peaceful day, but inside the cabin, unease hung as heavy as the smoke curling from the chimney. Clara Mae moved quietly, her every motion careful and distant. A guest who didn't want to seem like a burden. Elias had spent most of the morning fixing the corral fence, yet his mind never strayed far from her. The rumors from Dry Creek gnawed at him, the whispers of murder, sin, and shame. But more than that, he couldn't shake the image of her eyes the night he found her, wide and hollow, whispering that she wasn't clean. He wanted to understand what those words really meant. When he stepped back into the cabin near midday, Clara was by the wash basin, her back to him. She'd been trying to scrub her dress in cold water, though her hands trembled with exhaustion. The fabric was torn and nearly falling apart. It would never come clean, no matter how much she tried. Elias set down the bucket he carried and said gently, "You don't have to do that. There's clean water and cloth in the cupboard. Let me—" She turned sharply, eyes wide. "No, please, don't touch my things." Her tone froze him where he stood. There was panic behind her voice, not rudeness. He raised his hands in peace. "All right," he said softly. "Ain't no harm meant." She blinked, realizing how harsh she'd sounded. Her voice softened. I can do it myself." Elias nodded and busied himself with small chores, feeding the fire, patching a tear in the curtain, giving her space. But he couldn't help glancing at her now and then. She moved stiffly, favoring one side of her body. When she bent to rinse the dress, the collar slipped from her shoulder, revealing a flash of darkened skin. And for a moment, he saw what she had been hiding. The mark looked like a burn at first, a deep, jagged scar curling just below her collarbone. But as she straightened and caught him looking, her hand flew to cover it, eyes full of terror. The dress slipped from her grasp, the soaked cloth hitting the floor with a heavy slap. "Clara," he began, but she shook her head violently. "No," she whispered. "Don't look at me, please." Her voice cracked like glass. "You don't understand. I told you. I'm not clean." Elias stepped forward slowly, heart pounding, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. "Who did that to you?" he asked finally, voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Her hands clutched the edge of the basin as if to steady herself. When she finally spoke, her words were trembling but steady. "They did. The man in Silverton. Said I was wicked. Said I deserved to be marked so no decent man would touch me again." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. "Marked?" She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Branded. Like cattle. For something I didn't do." He stood there, unable to speak. The fire popped behind them, the only sound in the silence. He'd seen cruelty before on the battlefield, in prison camps, but this was worse. This was the kind of cruelty that wore righteousness like armor. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "They said I tempted a man, but he was the one who—" She stopped, choking on the words. "And when I told the truth, no one believed me. So they made sure I'd never be believed again." Her body shook, and Elias crossed the distance between them. He didn't touch her, not yet, just stood close enough for her to feel his presence, his steadiness. "You don't owe me shame," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve that." She stared at him, confusion flickering through her tears. "You don't think I'm dirty?" Elias's jaw tightened. "You're the only honest thing I've met in years." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Clara sank to her knees, the ruined cloth forgotten on the floor. The weight she had carried alone for so long finally cracked open in the quiet safety of his cabin. Elias knelt beside her, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not touching, waiting, offering warmth without demand. In that fragile silence, something unspoken passed between them. Not pity, but understanding. And for the first time in years, Elias Boone's heart truly stopped. Not from shock or fear, but from awe. Because in her brokenness, he saw a strength purer than anything the world had ever shown him. The night after Clara's secret was revealed, the wind carried a chill that seemed to seep through the walls of Elias Boone's cabin. The fire crackled low, throwing soft orange light that flickered over the wood floors and across Clara's face. She sat near the hearth, wrapped in one of Elias's old blankets, staring into the flames as if they might consume the ghosts that haunted her. Elias sat across from her, silent. He'd asked no questions since that moment by the wash basin, and his restraint had given her something she hadn't known in years, space to breathe. But now, with the storm gone and the truth half spoken, silence no longer soothed her. It pressed down instead, demanding to be broken. She drew in a shaky breath. "You deserve to know," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "If the sheriff comes asking, you should know what they'll say about me." Elias set his coffee aside, giving her his full attention. "You can tell me or not. Either way, you're safe here." Clara smiled faintly, bitterly. "Safe. I used to think that word meant something." She looked at him then, really looked, searching his face as though testing whether it was strong enough to hold what she was about to say. "I worked in Silverton at a boarding house. My mother died young and I had no kin left. The only work a woman like me could get was serving meals to minors and gamblers. Most nights I just poured whiskey and kept my head down." She paused, twisting the edge of the blanket in her hands. "Then Mr. Harlan's son started coming in, the mine owner's boy. Drunk, loud, used to getting what he wanted. Everyone knew better than to cross him. I tried to stay away, but he didn't take kindly to being told no." Her voice faltered, and Elias felt his stomach twist. "He hurt you," he said quietly. Clara nodded once, the movement small and rigid. I screamed. "Fought him off. One of the miners came running. But when Harlan's men showed up, they said I'd tempted him, that I'd wanted it. No one questioned him. Why would they? He was money. I was dirt." The blanket slipped from her shoulders, revealing the faint outline of the scar on her collarbone. They said a woman who'd lure a man like that couldn't be clean. The sheriff let his men do what they wanted. They branded me and threw me out. Said if I ever came back, they'd hang me. The fire cracked, and the silence that followed was thick, raw. Elias's hands curled into fists against his knees. He wanted to rage, to ride into Silverton and tear the place apart board by board. But when he looked at Clara, he saw that fury was not what she needed. She needed something far harder to give, peace. Clara, he said softly. What they did. That wasn't justice. That was cowardice, she laughed, a sound brittle as glass. The world don't care about justice for women like me. Out there, a man's word weighs more than truth. Elias leaned forward, his gaze steady. Then to hell with out there. You're in my house now. My word's what counts here. Something in his tone broke through her defenses. Her lips trembled, and for the first time, tears she'd held back for years began to fall. You shouldn't waste kindness on me, she whispered. I'll bring trouble to your door. Trouble's been to my door before, he replied. Didn't scare me then. Won't scare me now. Clara looked away, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. The firelight softened her features, washing away the hardness carved there by pain. You don't know what it's like, she murmured. To be branded as unworthy. To have your own name turned into a curse. Elias stared into the flames, his voice rough when he finally spoke. I fought in the war. I saw men die for things they never did. I carried that guilt home, thinking I'd never wash it off. So maybe I do know, a little. Their eyes met across the dim room, two souls stripped bare, their wounds different but born of the same cruel world. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. You believe me? I don't just believe you, Elias said. I see you. The fire popped again, casting sparks into the dark. And in that quiet cabin, surrounded by nothing but night and wind, Clara Mae Dalton's confession no longer hung between them like a curse. It became a promise of something neither of them thought they'd ever find again. Understanding. The next morning dawned still and gray, the kind of quiet that comes after too many days of wind and rain. The land around the Boone Ranch glistened with dew, but inside the cabin the air felt heavier than ever. Elias moved through his chores mechanically, feeding the horses, mending the gate, but his thoughts were tangled in Clara's confession. Her words had carved themselves into his mind like scars in the bark of an old tree. He'd seen cruelty before. He'd watched men torn apart in battle, heard soldiers scream for mercy that never came. But what had been done to Clara was different. It wasn't the chaos of war, it was deliberate, righteous cruelty, the kind people called justice. That thought made something inside him burn. When he returned to the cabin, Clara was sitting by the window, her hands folded in her lap, staring out across the fields. She looked smaller somehow, as though speaking her truth had left her hollow. Yet there was also something steady about her now, a quiet dignity, fragile but unbroken. Did you sleep? Elias asked softly. She shook her head. I dreamed of Silverton. It never leaves. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were distant. Sometimes I think I can still feel the iron. He hesitated, then crossed the room and poured her a cup of coffee. Dreams lose their power if you talk about 'em. She accepted the cup, her fingers brushing his. Talking don't change what's real, she murmured. Elias looked down, his jaw tightening. No, but maybe it makes it hurt less. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then she asked quietly, Why do you care so much, Elias Boone? You don't owe me anything. He met her gaze. Maybe not. But I know what it's like to carry ghosts. You learn to recognize that look in someone else. She frowned. You mean from the war? Elias nodded slowly. I did things I can't take back. Lost men I should have saved. When I came home, folks treated me like a hero. But I didn't feel clean either. Not for a long time. Clara studied him, her eyes softening. So that's why you didn't turn me in, he gave a faint smile. I reckon I've seen enough punishment handed to the wrong people. Her lips curved in something that might have been the beginning of a smile. It was small, fleeting, but it lit her face in a way Elias hadn't seen before. For the first time since he'd found her, she looked like someone who might still believe in kindness. But the peace didn't last long. That afternoon, the wind picked up again, carrying with it a distant sense of unease. Elias noticed Clara watching the horizon often, flinching at every sound. "They'll come looking for me," she said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "They always do." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "If they come, they'll find me first." Her eyes widened. "You'd fight for me?" "I'd fight for what's right," he said simply. "You being alive and free, that's right enough for me." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they didn't fall. "You're a fool, Elias Boone," she whispered. "And fools get hurt." He chuckled softly, though his heart ached. Wouldn't be the first time. That night, after she'd gone to bed, Elias sat alone by the fire. The storm outside hadn't yet broken, but inside him, one already raged. He'd promised himself years ago never to care again, never to let someone close enough to reopen old wounds. Yet here he was, feeling the stirrings of something dangerous and tender. He could lie to himself all he wanted, but he knew the truth. Clara's pain had awakened something in him. A need not just to protect her, but to see her whole again. As thunder rumbled far off in the distance, Elias whispered to the empty room, "You're not the only one haunted. Clara may." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, as if echoing his confession. The real storm, the one that would test them both, was only just beginning. By the time a week had passed, the calm at Elias Boone's ranch had turned fragile, like thin ice beneath heavy boots. The days were quiet, the chores steady, but beneath the stillness ran a current of unease neither Elias nor Clara could ignore. The townsfolk of Dry Creek had long memories and louder mouths, and rumors traveled faster than a prairie fire in dry grass. It began with a single rider seen near Elias's land. Then another. By the third morning, Clara spotted two figures on horseback in the distance, lingering near the ridge line before turning back toward town. When she told Elias, he only frowned, jaw tightening. "They're watching," she said softly. "I know," he answered, cinching the saddle on his horse. "But let him. A man's got a right to company if he wants it." But even as he said it, he knew the town didn't see it that way. Dry Creek had a habit of minding everyone's business except its own. To them, a woman with no husband, no family, and a ruined name wasn't a guest. She was a threat to the order of things. That afternoon, Elias rode into town for supplies. The street was busier than usual, and he could feel the stares following him as he passed. Near the saloon porch, Sheriff Jed Carter stood talking to Miss Lorna Graves, the woman whose gossip had started the whispers. She gave Elias a thin smile, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. "Boone," the sheriff called out. "Mind stepping down a minute?" Elias dismounted slowly. Carter was a fair man most days, but he didn't like trouble, and he had that look now, the kind that said he'd been dragged into something unpleasant. "Word's spreading fast," Carter said. "Folks say you're harboring someone." "A woman from Silverton." Elias's expression didn't change. "I've got a hand helping me at the ranch." "That a crime now?" Miss Lorna's voice slid in like a knife. "Depends on the kind of woman, Sheriff. The one they're looking for was branded for sin. Filthy thing, they say, and dangerous." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Enough, Lorna." He turned back to Elias. "Look, I don't want trouble. But Silverton's sheriff sent a telegram. They're looking for a Clara May Dalton. Said she might be dangerous and wanted for questioning." "Questioning or hanging?" Elias asked quietly. Carter sighed. "You tell me. You seen her?" For a heartbeat, Elias said nothing. Then he met the sheriff's gaze squarely. "Can't say I have." Miss Lorna gasped softly. Carter studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right, Boone, but if she shows up, I need to know." "The law don't go blind out here, even for you." Elias tipped his hat. "Understood." He mounted his horse and rode out without another word. The ride home was long and silent, his mind churning. He'd lied to a man he respected, but what choice did he have? He'd seen what justice looked like for women like Clara. The law would not protect her. It would destroy her again. When he reached the ranch, Clara was waiting by the barn, her eyes searching his face before he even spoke. "They know, don't they?" she asked. He nodded. "Sheriff's looking. But he don't know for sure. She looked down, her hands twisting the edge of her shawl. I should go. Before they come, Elias stepped closer. You run, they'll chase you. You stay. At least you're not alone. Tears welled in her eyes, though she tried to blink them back. I've been alone a long time, Elias. It's safer that way. Not this time, he said firmly. You got someone standing with you now. That night, the wind carried the sound of hooves across the hills again. Distant, but coming closer. The shadows of Dry Creek were stretching toward the Boone Ranch, and Elias knew it was only a matter of time before they reached his door. He banked the fire, checked his rifle, and stood at the window for a long time, watching the dark horizon. The town could whisper all it wanted. Come dawn, he was done hiding. The real test was coming, and it would decide whether mercy could survive in a place built on judgment. The next morning broke cold and tense. The sun rose pale over the Boone Ranch, its weak light cutting through a low mist that clung to the valley like breath held too long. Elias had barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant coyote's call had sounded like hoofbeats to his uneasy mind. He knew it was only a matter of time before Sheriff Carter rode out. Sure enough, by mid-morning, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the ridge. Clara was at the window before Elias even looked up. Her hands trembled against the glass. It's them, she whispered. Elias nodded, calm but alert. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone but me. He stepped out into the yard as 3 riders came down the slope. Sheriff Carter in front, flanked by 2 deputies. The sheriff's face was drawn, not hostile, but set in that grim, duty-bound way of a man who wished the job were someone else's. Morning, Boone, Carter called, dismounting. Hope I'm not interrupting your chores. Elias met him halfway. Never too busy for company, Sheriff. What brings you out this far? Carter glanced toward the cabin. You know what brings me. The deputies stayed back, watching the windows like vultures waiting for movement. Elias stood his ground, hands loose but steady at his sides. If you've got something to ask, best ask it plain. Carter sighed and pulled a folded paper from his coat. Telegram from Silverton came through last night. Describes Clara Mae Dalton, 25, dark hair, branded wrist. Escaped custody after killing a man. Elias's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of man? Her husband, Carter said. Preacher. Name was Samuel Dalton. Folks there say she stabbed him while he slept. A cold wind passed between them. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Elias said quietly, You believe that? Carter's jaw tightened. Doesn't matter what I believe. My job's to bring her in if she's here. She ain't dangerous, Elias said firmly. Not the way they claim? You sure of that? Elias looked past him toward the cabin. Through the curtain, he caught the faintest glimpse of Clara's face. Pale, frightened, but defiant. He turned back to the sheriff. Yeah, I'm sure. Carter studied him for a long moment. You're a good man, Elias. Don't ruin yourself over someone else's sins. Funny, Elias said quietly. I thought sin was what happens when good men look away. For a heartbeat. The air between them was heavy with unspoken things, loyalty, guilt, and the bitter taste of the past. Carter sighed again and tucked the paper away. I'll give you a day, he said finally. After that, I can't look the other way. You understand me? Elias nodded. I do. The sheriff mounted his horse and turned to his men. Let's go. The 3 riders disappeared over the hill as silently as they'd come, leaving the ranch steeped in uneasy quiet. When Elias went back inside, Clara was standing in the middle of the room, eyes shining with unshed tears. He knows, she whispered. He suspects, Elias corrected. But he gave us time. Her voice broke. Why would he do that? Because he ain't cruel, Elias said. And maybe because he remembers I pulled him out of a gunfight in Dodge once. Clara stared at him. You risked your life for him, and now you're risking it for me. You don't even know if I did it. Elias's voice was steady, but there was fire beneath the words. I know enough. I've seen the kind of man who hides behind scripture and pain. You did what you had to. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. You don't understand, Elias. He wasn't just cruel. He owned me. And when I tried to leave, He said if I wasn't clean, no man would ever touch me again. Her hand brushed the faint scar at her wrist, the brand that marked her as unclean. Elias stepped closer, gently taking her hand. He don't own you now. For the first time, Clara looked him in the eyes without fear. What happens when the sheriff comes back? Elias squeezed her hand. Then we tell the truth, the real one. And if the town won't hear it, we'll make 'em. Outside, the wind shifted, scattering dust across the yard. The countdown had begun. They had one day before the law returned, and with it the ghosts of Clara's past. That night neither of them slept. The fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the walls, and the unspoken thought between them lingered. One more sunrise and everything could end. The morning sun rose slow and gold over the Boone Ranch, painting the land in deceptive peace. But inside the cabin the air was thick with tension. Clara hadn't touched her breakfast. Her eyes stayed fixed on the small iron stove, as if it held the power to change her fate. The sheriff would return soon, and Elias knew that when he did, the truth could no longer hide behind silence. Elias sat across from her, his hat on the table, his hands folded. "You need to tell me everything, Clara," he said softly. "All of it. If we're going to stand our ground, I can't be fighting shadows." She lifted her gaze slowly, her face pale but resolute. "You think the truth will help?" "It didn't last time. It never does." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but lies won't keep you safe either." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a deep breath, she began. "I married Samuel Dalton when I was 19, she said. "He was the town preacher, older than me by 15 years. My father thought it was a blessing. Said a preacher's wife would never starve." Her voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. "At first he was kind. He'd pray with me, teach me scripture. But then he changed. Said I tempted men just by breathing. Said sin lived in my skin." Elias's fists clenched under the table. "He'd lock me in the cellar for days," she continued, her tone hollow. "Said he was purging me. When I begged him to stop, he'd say the Lord spoke through him. And when the townsfolk asked about my bruises, he told them I was possessed, that I needed to be cleansed." She paused, staring at the floor. "One night after he branded me, I tried to run. He caught me by the barn. Said he'd rather see me dead than dirty. That's when I took his knife." Her voice broke. "I didn't mean to kill him, Elias. I just wanted him to stop. But when he fell, I knew they'd never believe me." Elias's chest tightened. He rose slowly, walked to her side, and knelt beside her chair. "You did what you had to do. No one alive has the right to judge that." Clara turned toward him, tears finally falling. "When they found me, the sheriff in Silverton said a woman like me was better off dead. They branded me again before throwing me in a cell. That's where I heard them talking. How they planned to make an example of me come Sunday. So I escaped." Elias rested a steady hand over hers. "And you've been running ever since." She nodded, trembling. "Until you found me." Silence filled the cabin for a long moment. Outside, the wind rustled the dry grass, whispering secrets between the fence posts. Elias stood and walked to the window, looking out toward the distant ridge where the sheriff would soon appear. His reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered, but there was a fire in his eyes that hadn't burned for years. "I fought in the war," he said quietly. "Saw men hang for less than what was done to you. Folks like to talk about justice, but half of them don't know what the word means." Clara looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "Then what do we do?" He turned to her, jaw set. "We tell the truth, just like you told me. If Carter's the man I think he is, he'll listen. And if he don't, then I'll make him." Her breath caught. "You'd stand against the law for me?" Elias nodded. "I'd stand against hell itself if it meant you could walk free." For the first time since she'd arrived, Clara's expression softened, not with fear or shame, but with something close to hope. "You shouldn't have to fix what the world broke," she said. Elias gave a faint, sad smile. "Maybe not, but somebody's got to try." Outside, a faint cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, riders approaching. The moment of truth had come. Clara rose to her feet, wiping her tears. "Then let's face it," she said. "Together." Elias nodded once. Together. He reached for his rifle, not as a weapon, but as a promise that no matter what happened next, she would never be alone again. And as the sound of hoofbeats grew louder across the dry valley, the lies of Silverton and the ghosts of their past rode toward them. Demanding a reckoning neither could escape. By noon, the riders from Dry Creek were visible, dark figures against the sun, moving with grim purpose down the ridge. The sheriff rode at the front, his star glinting faintly in the harsh light. Dust rose behind the horses like smoke trailing from a fire that had already begun. Inside the Boone cabin, Elias and Clara stood side by side, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself was waiting to break. "They're here," Elias said quietly. Glancing through the window, Clara's hands were clenched around the hem of her dress, knuckles white. "I'll talk to him," she whispered. "Maybe if he hears it from me." Elias shook his head. "You'll talk, but not alone. Not ever again." She met his eyes and nodded. There was no trace of the frightened woman he'd rescued from the dirt weeks ago. Only someone determined to face whatever came, no matter the cost. Moments later, a knock thundered on the door. Elias opened it slowly, rifle resting but not raised. Sheriff Carter stood there, his face lined with weariness, his deputies just behind him, hands near their holsters. "Afternoon, Boone," Carter said evenly. "We need to talk." Elias stepped aside. "Then talk." The sheriff's eyes moved to Clara, who stood a few paces back in the cabin's dim light. Recognition flickered. Pity, too, though he tried to hide it. "Clara May Dalton," he said. "You know why I'm here." Clara drew in a breath and stepped forward. "I do, and I know what they told you, that I killed a good man in cold blood." "But he wasn't good, Sheriff." "Not to me." Carter's jaw tightened. "I've heard stories both ways." "Then hear mine," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "Samuel Dalton wasn't a preacher. He was a tyrant in a collar. He hurt me, Sheriff, worse than any outlaw could. He branded me, shamed me, locked me away. When I fought back, he called it sin." The deputies shifted uncomfortably. Even hardened men found it hard to look her in the eyes. "I didn't kill him to escape judgment," she continued. "I killed him to survive it." Carter's gaze moved between her and Elias. "You could have run to the next town. Asked for help." "Help?" she whispered bitterly. "From who? The same people who held me down when he burned me? The same ones who said I deserved it?" Silence filled the cabin. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Elias finally spoke. "You know me, Carter. You know the kind of man I am. I don't shelter killers. I shelter the broken, because I've been one myself. You look at her and tell me she's guilty of anything but surviving." The sheriff rubbed a hand across his jaw, torn between duty and conscience. "Elias, if I let her go, Silverton'll say I've turned against the law. They'll send men after both of you." "Then let 'em come," Elias said. "But I won't hand her over." For a long, heavy moment, the room was still. Then Carter holstered his gun. "You're a damn fool," he muttered. "But maybe that's what this world needs more of." He turned to his deputies. "We're done here." The younger deputy frowned. "Sheriff, she's not wanted here," Carter interrupted sharply. "And if Silverton asks, I never found her." Elias exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders for the first time in days. Clara's hand rose to her mouth in disbelief. As Carter turned to leave, he paused at the door. "You best get her far from here, Boone. By tomorrow, Silverton will send their own." "And they won't be as kind," Elias nodded. "Understood." When the riders finally disappeared over the horizon, Clara collapsed into a chair, trembling. "He believed me," she whispered. "After all this time." "Someone finally believed me." Elias knelt beside her, his hand steady on hers. "Believing is one thing," he said. "Surviving is another. We ain't done yet." Outside, the wind had changed. Colder now, carrying the faint promise of rain and the echo of distant thunder. Their reckoning had passed, but the storm ahead was far from over. Elias knew they had one night to prepare, to leave behind the land he'd built and the ghosts that haunted it. Because come dawn, the world would come hunting again. The sky that evening was bruised and restless, the kind of sky that warned of both storm and change. Elias Boone stood on the porch, watching the horizon churn. The wind tugged at his coat and whistled through the fence posts, carrying the scent of rain and distant thunder. He knew the sheriff's warning wasn't just talk. Men from Silverton would come. And when they did, they'd bring iron and fire, not justice. Inside, Clara packed quietly. She moved with purpose now, not fear, folding what little she had into a burlap sack, a dress, a small Bible, a piece of cloth she'd kept since childhood. Elias stepped in and looked around the cabin that had been his refuge for years. Every board, every dented tin cup, every scar on the door told a story. But now, all of it would have to be left behind. "You sure you're ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, not looking up. "I've been running half my life, Elias. Might as well finish what I started." He frowned. "This ain't running. This is surviving. There's a difference." Her eyes met his, steady and sad. "Doesn't feel much different when the world's chasing you." He didn't answer. Instead, he went to the trunk near his bed and opened it. Inside was an old revolver wrapped in oiled cloth, along with a leather pouch of coins and a map stained by time. He handed her a folded paper. "This trail'll take us west through the canyon. We can reach Fort Henry by dawn if the weather holds." "And if it doesn't?" she asked. He gave a faint smile. "Then we get wet." They left under the cover of dusk. The storm broke not long after, a violent, rolling tempest that turned the dirt road into a river of mud. Lightning tore across the sky in jagged white lines, and thunder shook the ground beneath their horses' hooves. Clara clung to her saddle, her cloak plastered to her skin, her face pale but determined. Behind them, Dry Creek disappeared into the night, the town lights swallowed by rain and distance. Ahead lay miles of open wilderness and the hope of freedom that neither quite dared to believe in. At one point, the wind grew so fierce they were forced to seek shelter beneath a rocky outcrop. Elias dismounted and led the horses under the narrow ledge, helping Clara down. She was shivering, soaked to the bone. He quickly struck a spark, coaxing a small fire to life beneath the rock's protection. The flickering light revealed her face, exhausted, streaked with mud, yet still carrying that quiet strength that had drawn him to her from the start. "You all right?" he asked, handing her his coat. She nodded, clutching it around her shoulders. "I keep thinking of what he said, the sheriff, that they'll come again. What if they never stop?" Elias looked into the flames. "Then we don't stop either. There's more to this land than Silverton or Dry Creek. Somewhere out there's a place that don't care who you were, only who you are now." Her eyes softened. "And who am I now, Elias Boone?" He met her gaze, the firelight reflected in his eyes. "You're a woman who lived through hell and still walks straight. That makes you cleaner than most." For a long moment, they just sat in silence, listening to the rain pound the earth outside. It was as though the storm itself was washing away the last of what they'd been. Preacher's wife, broken soldier, leaving only what they could be next. As the fire burned lower, Clara reached out and placed her hand over his. "I used to think no one could look at me without seeing the brand," she whispered. "But you never flinched." "I see it," Elias said quietly. "But I see you more." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the canyon walls. Elias stood, peering into the darkness beyond. "We'll move when the rain slows," he said. "If we're lucky, the storm will cover our tracks." Clara smiled faintly. "You think there's luck left for people like us?" He turned back toward her, his expression soft but certain. "No, just choice." And as the thunder rolled over them like the growl of a restless world, the two outcasts sat together beneath the storm, bound not by fear or guilt, but by the stubborn, flickering light of something almost holy, the will to keep going. By dawn, they would ride again, not to escape their past, but to finally outrun its shadow. The storm broke near dawn, leaving the sky streaked in bruised shades of violet and gold. The air was clean, heavy with the scent of wet sage and earth, and for the first time in weeks, Clara could see beyond the horizon, a pale ribbon of light stretching westward. They had survived the night, though barely. The fire had long since died out, and both she and Elias were chilled to the bone. Yet, As the first rays of morning crept across the canyon floor, something inside her stirred, a fragile sense of rebirth. Elias saddled the horses, his movements deliberate despite the exhaustion in his eyes. Mud clung to his boots, his hat hung low, but his resolve hadn't faltered. He glanced toward her, offering a faint, reassuring nod. "We've got maybe 10 miles to Fort Henry," he said. "Once we reach it, we can find a wagon heading north." "You'll be safe there," Clara hesitated.
And you?
He gave a small, weary smile. "I'll head back east once you're settled. See what's left of the ranch." Her heart tightened at his words. The thought of parting, after all they'd endured, struck her harder than she expected. "You can't go back," she whispered. "They'll come for you, too." He adjusted the saddle cinch, not meeting her eyes. "Maybe, but I've never been much good at running." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Then don't. Not this time. Stay." For a moment, the only sound was the steady drip of water from the rocks above. Elias turned to her finally, and for the first time, she saw the weight he carried, not just for her, but for himself. "Clara," he said softly, "a man like me don't get to start over. I've done things, in the war, on the trail, that don't wash off easy." She reached for his hand, her fingers light but sure. "Then maybe that's why you found me," she said, "'cause I know what it means to be called unclean." He looked at her then. Really looked. And something in his chest eased. All the anger, all the guilt that had bound him for years seemed to loosen in that single breath. They rode through the morning light in silence. The land unfurled before them, vast and unending, painted with the soft glow of renewal. Every hoofbeat carried them farther from judgment, closer to something neither dared name. By midday, the faint outline of Fort Henry appeared in the distance, a cluster of wooden roofs and smoke curling upward from cook fires. Civilization in all its harsh mercy. Clara slowed her horse, staring at it. "That's it?" she asked. "That's freedom?" Elias looked toward the fort, then back at her. "Freedom ain't a place. It's the chance to breathe without fear." As they approached, a sentry spotted them and waved. Elias raised a hand in return, but his focus stayed on Clara. When they reached the edge of town, he dismounted and helped her down. Her legs trembled as her boots met solid ground, not from weakness, but from the strange, almost unbearable feeling of safety. She turned to him, eyes glistening. "You saved me, Elias." He shook his head. "No, you saved yourself. I just rode beside you." Her lip quivered. "What'll you do now?" He glanced toward the horizon. "Head south, maybe. Find a stretch of land no one cares to claim. Try living quiet for once." Clara took a step closer. "And if I asked you to stay?" He hesitated, the wind tugging at his coat. "Then I'd forget what quiet means." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she smiled. Small, broken, but real. Maybe quiet's overrated. For a long moment, they just stood there in the golden light of morning. Two souls scarred by the same world, yet remade by each other's kindness. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I'm not clean, Elias Boone, but for the first time, I don't feel dirty anymore." He reached out, brushing the tear from her cheek. "You were never dirty, Clara. The world just lied to you." Behind them, the sun broke free of the clouds, bathing the valley in light. It was more than dawn. It was deliverance. Elias helped her toward the fort, their steps slow but sure. Neither knew what lay ahead, only that they'd earned it. As they walked, a hawk circled above, gliding effortlessly on the wind, and the storm-soaked land shimmered like a promise. Whatever came next, whether together or apart, they had already won something the world could never take, redemption born from ruin. And as the sun climbed higher, the ghosts of their pasts faded, carried away by the wind, leaving behind only the truth, that even in the harshest land, mercy can bloom like wildflowers after rain.